In this lesson, we're going to create textures for the falling water and the interior of the pool. Now, the area that is going to be catching the water also does need a custom texture. So let's first of all just isolate the interior of the pool as well as this water trough that is going to catch the water from the rim flow. So let's create a simple material for the interior because that can have one single material. This one's going to be called pool mosaic or pool tiles. And into the diffuse slot, we're going to put a bitmap of those pool tiles, which is going to be this one here. And we already have a bump map to put into it, so we can put that into the bump slot. And that is this right there. So this is going to be our material. It has got a bump of 30, so that's more or less fine. We don't need to go any further than that. And we can also copy this bump, the black and white one, into the reflect slot. Now we can reduce that to about 20, and we can see whether we need to go up or down in terms of that value. Let's add a background so we can see the reflections, and let's drop this to 0.85, just to give it a slight sheen. This may need to be slightly higher to keep some of the reflectivity, so let's go to 0.92. I just want to get a little bit of glossiness visible on this. Now, thanks to this reflect, what's actually happening is that only the tiles themselves are actually reflecting. So everything that's white will be reflective and everything that's black will have no reflectivity. In other words, the grout joints will not be reflective at all. So this material can now be simply applied to our pool. We can go and view that end result. And let's now use bitmap fit for the UVW and scale that down until we get the density that we require. So again, going too dense or going as dense as the real product would actually be would probably show too much of the tiling, and it may end up being too dense. So a couple of test renders would be a good idea at this point. So next, the material that we need right now is a multi-sub-object material. So let's create that material from scratch. We're going to discard. Let's delete everything until we only have two slots, and this is going to be pool, tiles, and wall. And this material is now going to be a combination of the pool tiles, first of all. So that can be in the number 2 slot. We can instance that. We call tiles. And the other material will be the walls exterior. So let's go and copy that, and we will put it into the slot for that multi-sub object material. So we need to basically drag it into the slot here, and we can also instance that. So this will be called walls. This material will now be applied to the water catchment area. So let's go in now and select the appropriate faces. All we really need to do is select the edges, and then we will ring that selection. So let's go now and select all of this. And then this edge can already be a wall. Now we will ring that and control click the polygon, and that will convert everything into a polygon selection. So that is going to be the mosaic, which is a number 2 material ID. So let's scroll down and increase that ID to 2, Control I, and that already is number 1. Let's apply that material, and let's copy the UV map. So what you'll see as well here is that the UV map being copied is going to override the UV map that should have been for the wall. In other words, you can't really have one UV map acting for 2 objects without actually going in and changing the map channel. So what that means is that in this case, we will need a separate mapping channel for both of these textures if we do want to have 2 UVW maps acting independently on each texture. So let's say that the tiles are texture 2, so we could come in and have this UV map acting on the second channel, which means that the textures would all need to have channel 2 selected, so that all of those textures would basically be modified by this UVW map. Then this one below would be acting on the materials with the channel number 1, and that one could be the wall material that we have in that multi-sub-object material slot. So just remember that that channel can then be applied to multiple sub-object materials and scale them individually. So I'm now going to just apply this material, make sure that we can see what's happening inside. And this here is going to have a channel 2. And let's isolate out of that. So now we have the interior of the pool done. The next part is going to be the work that needs to be finished on the water. So the water elements are these two here. If we isolate those, we're going to have two different materials. One for the top of the water, which is going to be this material here. Remember that we put that caustic reflection into the diffuse slot and reduced the intensity by 50%. And then we're going to create another water material for this part, which is falling down. So I'm going to pause the video here. We're going to open up Photoshop and we're going to start working on the water material in Photoshop in a second. So now we have the 44begin.psd file open in Photoshop, and what we're going to do is extract a small portion of it that we can then apply to our model that we have in 3ds Max. So let's go right now and just use the selection marquee to select this area here, which is more or less the area where the water is falling down one of the steps. Let's double click on this so that we convert it into a new layer which is not locked, and let's just invert the selection. So you can go to select and inverse, delete all of that, and let's just stretch out this area so that we don't have any water falling sideways. We basically just want to undo the perspective that there is so that the water can fall vertically down. With that done, you can then go and crop this off. And let's just go and add a little bit more blue color to this. So on a new layer, I'm going to right click here, go to gradient tool, and I'm just going to add a light gradient into this, holding down shift as I pull it down. And this object now, I can then take my brush and I can just start brushing away portions of it underneath. I'm just going to reduce the brush opacity and increase the diameter. And I just want to add a little bit more color, because remember that the top of the pool is going to be quite blue, especially with that mosaic, and you don't want to have too much of a stark difference as the water goes over the edge. So now that I've added more blue, I can change the way that the color interacts with my texture. So I can just go through and see if a different type of blending style would work any better. And if you're happy with one of them, then you can go ahead and flatten it or use it. And the last thing that we want to do here is to create a opacity map for this falling water. And what we're going to do to create that is create a little bit more blur. So we're going to make some motion blur facing straight down, so the angle will be 90 degrees. And here we're going to convert this into a black and white, so desaturate it. And Control L just to bring up the levels, and we're basically just going to darken and brighten the whites. Darken the black areas and brighten the whites. Then I'm going to invert that, and everything that is white is going to be more opaque. Actually, this will work better. So what that means is that when the water falls down, it's going to become more opaque as it becomes whiter, and the black area is going to be more transparent as it flows smoothly over that edge. If it is too black, you can just take a white paintbrush on a new layer, and you can just paint over with a very light opacity so that you can reduce the amount of transparency. So once this is all done, I'm going to save these two out, and I'm going to open them in 3D Max in a second. So right now I'm going to be pausing the video before I move these textures into 3ds Max. So now we're back in 3ds Max, and I've applied the diffuse and the bump onto the material for the water, and I've made a couple of changes, so just a few tweaks here and there. I've also included a displace, which I basically just transferred from the bump itself, and this is the result that I got. So if you really want to be fancy and you want to do this with a lot more accuracy and realism, you could go into particle effects and you could start to simulate the water flowing off this edge. At least if you wanted to create a feeling of mist coming from this, you could also do that with particles. For most architectural cases, it is enough just to create a sense of water, a bit of water flowing, and there's always Photoshop if you do want to add any other effects later. So for this part, I'm going to leave it at that. You can also have a look on the file itself and you can see what the properties are in the actual material that is set up. It's called water falling. So I've just been tweaking mainly the opacity, the bump, as well as the reflection, and there have also been some tweaks with the reflective glossiness that there is. So you can have a look at those settings and just see whether this suits your needs and if it is good enough for the project that you're working on. So we're now going to move on to the next section of our course, where we start to add planting to our exterior scene, and that is what we're going to get started with in the next lesson.